Dear Lord, help us knit us together. Dear Lord, help us knit us together. I begin with that because that's been my prayer all week. It's in part my prayer all week because I found my favorite mug, which I received as a gift a few years ago. I brought it to show you because I know you can't see it from where you're seated. And it has the caricature of 4 kids on it, and they're holding knitting needles. And it says, "Dear Lord, help us to knit us together." And I love this mug because it gives a nice little reminder of the unity we're called to. Not only the unity we're called to with each other, but with God Himself and God affecting that unity. And it became very clear earlier in the week that maybe on a humorous level, we needed to think a little bit about unity because some of our regular parishioners were commenting on my past Easter homilies. Some of you, if you were at the Mass I presided at last year, know that it was the year of the peeps, and I talked all about peeps. And the year before that, it was the homily about the Beanie Babies, and I pulled out my Beanie Baby collection. And this little debate arose which one they liked better, and there was division taking place, and I just said, "Dear Lord, help us knit us together." And I said, instead of thinking about all this division if Beanie Babies are better than Peeps or Peeps are better than Beanie Babies, let us see how they really are united. For example, there are green Peeps, we all know that, and green Beanie Baby. And they're even the same shade of green. I mean, they match, they just do. And we have yellow bunny rabbit Peeps. We've seen these, yellow bunny rabbit Peeps, right? You know. And there's also a yellow bunny rabbit Beanie Baby. And they kind of match too. It's pretty darn close, I think. You know, unity, knitting us together. There are now, new Peeps. This year, did you see them? They're really something, There are fruit punch Peeps. Did you see that? Fruit punch, new this year, at least new to our market. And that sort of goes along with my Father's Day Beanie Bear, and they match in color too. Once again, unity, knit us together, huh? And this one I'm not sure I really want to try. Pancakes and syrup Peeps. Brown, but who would want to eat something sweet but a brown bear? They match. Unity, the bear and the Peeps, huh? And then the final one, new to the market at least that I've seen this year, party cake Peeps. Have you gotten those? They're white with all these speckles, blue and red speckles that kind of match my 4th of July bear. Once again, unity. That's what we need to focus on. Dear Lord, help us knit us together. Well, on the humorous level, that is a prayer, but on the serious level, it is as well. Our world has a lot of problems. Dear Lord, help us knit us together. Yesterday, there were issues in Sudan with money. Today, in Sri Lanka, 2 Catholic churches bombed an Easter Mass. North Korea, an embassy was raided in Madrid. 13 people yesterday shot in Mexico and killed in a massacre in a bar. And I think we all looked on with horror on the burning of Notre Dame Cathedral. The world has so many problems. Dear Lord, help us knit us together. Our church throughout the world has many problems. Our diocese has many problems, and we know that so many have even pulled away from active practice of our faith. Especially why I'm so profoundly grateful to see all of you here this morning. And we need to pray. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together as your church. And families have so many struggles. Right now in our own parish, we have a little baby boy just a few days old in an incubator in a hospital. We have some of our teenagers ill in hospitals, many of our older parishioners ill and in hospitals. We already have 5 funerals scheduled for the coming week. Families mourning the loss of loved ones. Families that are experiencing separation and divorce and divisions in families where people will not even speak to one another. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. And you know, this idea is a truth, a reality that from the very moment of creation we were knit together. If you read that story of creation, God from the very beginning knit us together perfectly. We were perfectly one. God's creation was perfect, and then sin entered, and the first tear, the first pool, that first snag came when Eve was in the garden and the serpent began to talk to her. Personally, if a serpent started to talk to me, I would think twice about talking back and maybe seek some professional counsel. But nonetheless, she engaged in the conversation, and what was her sin? She allowed the serpent to convince her that she wasn't enough for God. Because the serpent said, look, if you were enough for God, you'd be like him and you'd be able to eat from that tree. But God doesn't want you to eat from that tree because he doesn't want you to be just like him. He wants you to be underneath him. You're not enough for him. That was her sin. And she believed that. And so often aren't our problems because we somehow are convinced we're not enough. Not enough in our career, not enough in the school, not enough in the community. The list could go on. And Adam's sin, there he is watching the serpent talk to his wife. And what was his sin? He wasn't there to protect her. He didn't step in. And then we see the greater pull, the greater tear, the next rip, because Adam is hiding as God is looking for him, and God is saying, where are you? I'm hiding because I'm naked. And God said, oh, really? And you figured this out how? And he said, well, it's the woman you put here with me. She made me eat that fruit. It's her fault. And the tear, the rip, got larger. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. And through all of history of the Old Testament, we see where God sent so many individuals to try to weave us back together. If it would be Moses and the Jewish people, all of the prophets coming to knit us back together. And we come to the readings today where we hear of the apostles, we hear of Mary Magdalene, and you can only begin to imagine that must have been their prayer when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, very confused, I'm sure, mourning, going to do Jewish burial custom, but I'm sure in her heart was, dear Lord, help us, knit us together. We do not know what is going on. And she gets this astounding news that he is risen. She goes to the apostles. The apostles, we don't hear anything about them from the Last Supper on, other than Peter denying our Lord 3 times and the beloved disciple at the cross. We don't know what happened to them, but they are all together, the 11 in the upper room. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together, I'm sure, was their prayer. And we know the story of Easter. It will unfold. We'll hear the story of Emmaus that Easter day, 2 individuals going back to Emmaus, talking about all the events, and I'm sure, dear Lord, help us, knit us together. And we hear the story of Thomas. I will not believe he's risen until I put my finger into the nail marks, my hand into his side. He wanted to believe. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. And then that moment of Pentecost, 50 days from now, when the Holy Spirit comes and empowers the apostles in that upper room, hiding and afraid, gives them the energy to go out and form the church in great adversity. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. And this is not just the Lord's action then, it's the Lord's action today. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. Who is in your life to do that? Yesterday morning, I went very early to get my car washed, but then I realized it was raining, so God washed it. So I did the only thing possible. I went to Tim Hortons for a cup of coffee and a bagel. And in the drive-thru, this very nice gentleman, he called me Father. even though my collar was pushed aside. He was so kind to me. And he said, you know, you're the pastor of St. Gregory's, aren't you? I said, yes. And he said, well, you used to be my pastor because I belong to Our Lady of Pompeii. And he was so kind to me. That simple human kindness. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. That horrible scene of the cathedral burning in Paris, right outside the burning cathedral, the beautiful scene of people kneeling in prayer, singing hymns of praise of God, primarily young people in a country where most have abandoned the faith. These young people, countless on the screen, you could see them in prayer. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. Yesterday there was a story that in the spire that fell down, the bees that were living in the spire also survived the fire. Now there's something, you know. Had a funeral a couple weeks ago at the funeral parlor, not here in church, and when I heard the words of the eulogy, I couldn't believe it. The daughter got up to speak, and she went into great detail, and she said, my two brothers, myself, haven't spoken to one another in years, many years. We haven't spoken or never really accepted my father, who just died, his new wife. But in the last several months since my dad was ill, it really called us all to come home. And we began to speak with one another as we had to care for him. And we finally got to know our stepmother and how we love her. And the family is reunited. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. Last night we baptized 3 adults and received 4 other individuals into the faith and confirmed 15. It was a big crew here in a time period where people are leaving our faith, the great sign of life of people choosing to come and take an active role in our faith. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. The purple candle burning by the statue of Mary, the prayer called upon by our bishop for all of us to pray for an entire year. We began Ash Wednesday for the healing of those who were abused, especially within the church. Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. This Easter, maybe make that your prayer. Are we looking for the divisions to keep us apart, or rather, can we make that prayer to be truly united? Dear Lord, help us, knit us together. You are a beautiful sight. The church is alive, well, and strong because you are here. You believe, and you are the needles that the Lord is using to once again knit the brokenness of our world back together. And for that, I thank you so very much.